there's obviously lots of complexity when you're thinking about financial markets and economies, but good thinking is not wastefully complex. People are trying to convey skill or expertise through complexity. That's not the sort of thing that works effectively in communication. For nearly a decade, I regularly wrote the Bridgewater Daily Observations, and in many ways continue the spirit of that work today, writing a morning note that I publish on social media on Twitter on a daily basis. And so, I think a lot of that process of how do you write how do you write a piece on such a consistent basis that investors find interesting, it really has to start with getting away from the goal of writing a piece that's interesting for investors. It really has to start with the idea of what, as an investor, are the questions that are on your mind as you come and approach what's going on in the world, what's happening in markets in that day, uh, and then let that be your guide to then ask the questions or explore the questions that are most interesting. Like the best writing, I could certainly say in financial markets is that which has the sort of authenticity of being inquisitive about what is actually going on and what you need to know in order to trade markets effectively on that day or, in the future. I think you want to combine that with, a style where, if you think about sort of writing about macroeconomics or finance, a lot of times, people are trying to convey skill or expertise through complexity, and that's not the sort of thing that works effectively in communication, and it frankly doesn't work effectively in terms of how to think clearly. And so part of the benefit of also writing on a day-to-day basis is the forcing mechanism to communicate simply and clearly what's going on. It's actually why I've really enjoyed the transition from writing in prose in a daily note to actually writing on Twitter, where I'm actually constrained in the number of words that I can use and what I can say, and really try and convey clearly, in a way that is accessible, what are the key points. Because there's obviously lots of complexity when you're thinking about financial markets and economies, but good thinking is not wastefully complex. Good thinking efficiently captures the essence of the key things that are going on. And so that process of writing and communicating it is frankly, that I learned when I was writing the daily observations on a regular basis, and now translates into my communication on a day-to-day basis as well. We often take for granted, those of us who are trading markets every day, looking at economic information every day, we take for granted the types of frameworks and the types of knowledge that we have and expertise we have. And particularly when you're engaging with policymakers, their expertise is not necessarily areas of macroeconomics and finance. And so, I often have found when working with policymakers that it's very effective to start from an educational lens. They may not have the core sort of frameworks and ways of thinking about what's going on. And so it's important to just start at that foundational level. These are not, these are smart folks who, think carefully about a lot of different issues. And so they often, pick these topics up very, very quickly. But it's important to start at that foundational level and bring them along between essentially the framework of how things work, the information that you're seeing, and then the conclusions that you're drawing from that set of information that you're seeing. And that way, when you're, talking to essentially a person who's a layperson when it comes to the macroeconomy and markets, what that sort of way of approaching the communication does is it allows them to engage very clearly on not just the conclusions, but why you think the world works the way that it does and what you're seeing in terms of the fact pattern that then allows you to draw the conclusions. And that works really well. The best interactions with policymakers should feel like they are calling up, an expert consultant who's bringing them along on the strategy related to important policy decisions. I don't really think that you have to work at a big firm for long term success. When I started at Bridgewater, there were like 100 people, and it was a challenger in the industry. What was most important was not the number of people in the building. What was most important was finding a strong cohort of people who were passionately working on trying to accomplish developing systematic approaches to macroeconomic investing. And so that idea is, it doesn't really matter how many people are in the building or in the company. What matters to your long-term success is surrounding yourself with, a small, smart handful of people who are passionately driving to, deeply understand whatever you're passionate about. That's really what determines, your long-term success, much more so than many of the other things that seem to determine success on paper.